welcome to Spirit Coffee Talk. Myself, Lisa Richmond, Elyse Cathray, and Ginette Byro down. Oh, I don't know if she's down there, if you can see her. She is to me. But welcome Friday morning, where we come together. We're the channelers and mediums of Avalon Spirit, and we meet every Friday for coffee, and we talk all things spirit. So welcome this week. We always kind of have a little pre-recording combo to see how we're doing. And one thing that we haven't really talked much about on Spirit Coffee Talk, I know Ginette, you've done some videos on it, and you're very good at explaining the process of our soul's journey in death. And we're kind of swapping stories about losing loved ones, or people around who have crossed over, and we're kind of like, well, we've never really talked about the soul's journey during that, and the many things that might or could or have gone on with that. So that's kind of what we're diving into today.
Awesome. As funny as it sounds, I get very excited when we get to talk about death, and not in a morbid way, but I get excited about shining a light and making this conversation palatable, approachable, explained in ways that we can then walk away from and feel more enlightened versus heavy and sad. Because I think a lot of death talk in standard society is of the weight and the sadness of death versus the transition, how it works from a spirit's perspective, and all of that. That can actually leave us feeling brighter and feeling joy and feeling
Yeah.
intellectualized with some stuff, right? So that's why I kind of get excited about it. So I think this is a great topic for today because, as we were talking about before, we have noticed a lot of people are dying again. It seems to happen in pockets where there's like a lot of souls that decide to start leaving at certain times, but oftentimes it happens in these like pockets of
Mhm.
many. And so
Mhm.
I know you guys have been talking about this as well.
And we did kind of talk about the fact that this might happen. Like it was a couple weeks ago, we're like,
Yeah.
have you guys gotten a little bit of like information that there's souls collecting to leave, like that are getting ready to leave?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know I did get that. And it's one of those things where you can collect what you get from that and information that comes in about that. But I don't know, for me, it's one that I get it, I write it down, and I'm like, okay, we'll see. Because I, I don't know. I get, maybe I don't have as much experience with um, explaining to people one on one, like with clients. Then yes, and it can bring a lot of closure to somebody and having that communication with that loved one for sure. But like when you get a download from spirit about more of a collection of souls that have decided to leave, like have you gotten that lately?
How about you, Elise?
Um, yes, and I know I have lots of different thoughts right now. I on Jeanette's note about just like the conversations that we often hear about death. I know when like I had lost grandparents and things like that, but when I lost my dad, somebody very close to me, I remember feeling like we as a society are very uncomfortable talking about death. We're very uncomfortable holding space for people who are grieving. It's like we know we want to because we feel for them and they're sad, and we love them and whatever, but to like hold them in their grief and hold them in the joy that can actually be coupled with grief, and to have like conversations about people, like even saying the word this person died, people have a really hard time with that. And so I agree, I think it's wonderful when we can have conversations about death that aren't just about the sadness, because of course that's true. And I would say even as mediums, when we connect with people on the other side, I really started to like have a hard time when people would say, "Oh, he's in a better place," or whatever, because I know that to be true, and we still miss our loved ones here in the physical, right? It's not the same, and to paint it as the same is really, I think, a challenging thing for people. Um, and so it's like there's a lot of beauty in holding the human grief experience and also knowing that they exist somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Which I love that about grief, even though it's like a weird, like you were saying, Jenna, it's not morbid, but it's like there can be beauty wrapped up in these really challenging things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know what I want to mention too that we were talking about before, and this is something we actually talk about often because as mediums, as being connected into spirit, getting insights or forthcoming information, sometimes we can get insights into this person's going to get a job in about 3 months' time, or in 2 months' time, you're going to meet a partner who, yada, yada, right? We can get sometimes these really interesting premonition based specificity. But when it comes to death, the timing of death is always surrounded in mystery and high potential of change in probabilities down to that finite timing,
So
right?
why
And
do
I
you
think
think? Why do you think? How have you been explained as to why that is?
it's because there is still so much free will involved in the decision of the time based on the soul. And so I have seen some situations where a soul, so if I back up for a second, if I see a spirit or spirit is talking to me about somebody who is alive, if I see that person's energy on a slide, the slide to me is an indicator that that person has already decided they're going to be crossing, most likely, right? They are going to be approaching an exit point. Depending on where I see them on the slide, usually gives me an indicator of how close they are to actually crossing. So top of the slide, it means they're decided, they're getting ready. But from top to bottom could be 3 to 6 months, but it could also be 3 to 6 days. Now, when I see somebody at the bottom of the slide, though, or in one case, I saw someone off the slide and in the air. So in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, they're in the air. This is like any moment, today, tomorrow. And even in that moment of them being in the air, they changed their mind and they were like, I'm not ready to go yet. And so what that taught me was how finitely detailed the changes can be, and how, again, this isn't a blanket statement for everybody because there's some exit points where it's like, that's it. Either your body has failed, it cannot come back, you are crossing over, or this is your final exit point. But when it's not someone's final exit point, there's maneuverability in there. Sometimes it's an extra 2 weeks. I've seen souls who had crossed and they asked for just a little bit more time, and so they were able to come back for a week or two, maybe a month. The free will journey of the human embodied is so valuable that spirit does its best not to jar that person or force that person into an exit point until the soul is ready. Because when the soul is ready to go, it makes for such a more seamless crossing.
Totally.
Yeah, and so I one little piece I want to talk about too quickly is when I say the soul is ready to go, that doesn't always mean the human consciousness is ready to go. So the human consciousness sometimes, if we're lucky, can come to an understanding, a piece of I'm ready to go, or they just are okay with it. But it's the soul aspect, some would say the subconscious, if you want to view it that way, is the one that is ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so when that one agrees and the other side is like, okay, we're ready, okay, we're good, okay, go time. And then they exit, that's so much more seamless for the soul and its crossing than when it's like yarded out of the body.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I think it comes down to like the if you think about our the amount of people that we cross over with on a day-to-day basis in our own just life journeys, and the amount of decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis, it's like there's so many infinite possibilities of any potential thing happening on any given day, right? I might decide in this moment I'm going to log off from Zoom and leave my house and get in a car accident. Or I might choose, no, I don't feel like I want to go, I'm going to stay, and I miss that situation completely, right? It's like those infinite teeny tiny little micro decisions that we make a million times a day, when you
Yeah.
think of how many potentials there are of how things could go, plus our free will choice, plus the free will choice of everybody around us. And that, it's my understanding too that sometimes people's souls get caught in the crosshairs of other people's decisions or other people's actions, that maybe that wasn't what the game plan was and when their soul wanted to go, but A plus B happened because of certain choices that were made, and there we are in that situation. So it's like the infinite potentials of possibility in like every little micro choice every day, I think can just add to the complexity of what that timing looks like.
Oh,
and you know what I find so interesting too with that is when we have so there's times where, you know, we three, speaking from our experience, have had indicators of when a soul may be approaching their exit point. And when we watch as those things happen, and we don't know the exact day or time, but we may know the general feeling or slide, right? We may see someone on the slide.
Yeah.
To observe the choices that they're making and doing is a really interesting observation to make, which we have to try and stay really detached from. But then it's also interesting when we see at those pivotal moments where something in their energy shifts.
Totally.
See their energy be like, nope, I'm going to stay longer. And sometimes you can observe that. You can see someone like taking the steps. Say, for example, they're like renewing their will. They start talking about death and dying. They start having these conversations of like, when I go, I want you to have this or this or
Or
this
they
or this.
start talking about, I had these dreams and these, like my dad came to me in my dream or so and so that is crossed over.
Mhm.
They start kind of having those visions and you're like, oh my God, you're close. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
But then you notice suddenly the person starts flipping something and changing, like, I'm going to go on a vacation now and I want to start these photography lessons and I want to, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like we were going this way and I could see tangible, logical steps, but now it's totally 180'd. And that is an example of how the soul can change course.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think sometimes when we observe that, it can actually help to, like, if we're willing to look a little bit deeper, it can help us observe what's happening in I want to say reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty powerful. At the
I
same
feel like
time, though, frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, generally speaking, like there's the term, it's like live every day like it's your last, or like treat people when they leave the house like it's the last time you could see them. So you can understand that, yes, like tr- trying to like, but if you have this indicator and this person is what you have understood as going through their last kind of parts of the slide, it can be really hard on this end because you're
Absolutely.
like, I don't know if this next call is the call. And then all of a sudden, like 6 months later, you're like, okay, I think I can back up. So it's interesting because we can see a soul's journey to an extent, but there's always going to be that mystery
Yep.
here on earth, no
Always.
matter how much we can see and what we can communicate with souls on the other side that are here and understand. And sometimes it's like, yeah, no, we saw that. But like always that great mystery, always, right? And to trust in that can be difficult, but I don't know. Like from my experience, you can't know the whole path, right? You don't know the whole path. But I've had the personal experience of feeling that soul cross. And I could literally feel the difference in the frequency of my connection with that individual once they passed, because all of a sudden it just like created like just the openness of this expansive light and love. And it's just that feeling and that connection that I got once they passed, right? And I was very close to them when they lived, but when they passed, it was like this, like almost like a freedom of love and connection. And it was just, I could just feel that difference. And I know that for some it doesn't feel the same because you can't like touch them and see them and hold them, right? But there is to be said for every soul that there is a sense of freedom
Mhm.
when
Mm-hmm.
they cross. There is a sense of freedom. And to not take that away from our human grievance at all and the memory of who they were. But when that connection, like as soon as, so I had a loved one pass yesterday, and as soon as I felt that he passed, I could feel his soul expand and be free. And it was just like this different connection that I had with him. It just changed. And so there's all the human emotions in it, but there's also this like expansive kind of like going home feeling too that I don't know that maybe not everybody feels, but I hope that at some point, like for us too as mediums, that's, you know, kind of like that's the point behind things, is being able to help people connect with that expansive love and that freedom. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just got really personal there, sorry. But
Fine. That's fine. Um, to build on that, I know some people will question, especially if they've already lost somebody, and um, especially if the person is younger or it was an accident, and they think, oh
yeah,
my gosh, could I have stopped it? Could I have done this? So many people get stuck in the survivor's guilt of how could they not have stepped in? How didn't they know? One thing I want to say to that is, in all the conversations I've had with spirits, with my guides, even about how it works, is if you are meant to intervene in someone's exit potential, you will be given away.
yeah,
You will be given an information, something really specific to act on. So I want to differentiate between having a knowing someone may pass without knowing when, how, where, anything that you can do to prevent it. If you're not given any info to prevent, it's not your responsibility. You're not being asked to step in. If you are being asked to step in, you will know to phone them at the exact time that prevents them from doing a thing. You will know to stop by their house. You will know to do something, right? Like you will be given the tools if you're meant to intervene. So for anyone that's stuck in that energy, if you weren't given the tools, it wasn't yours, and you have to, well, you don't have to, but the encouragement is to release that from your burden because
yeah.
it's not yours. Sometimes souls are meant to take that exit.
And that's just it. It's like sometimes the exit can be in a certain time frame, but it could be like A, B, C, D, whatever within like 3 days. So if they didn't choose that moment, they would choose another moment much like it, you know? And often I see souls that'll choose to exit when they're alone or sometimes with loved ones, or when they like leave a location, or when they get to a location, or you know what I mean? Like there are these maybe sometimes, right? But generally speaking, the choice for a soul and an exit point, even when it seems like like, you know, I really want to have a lot of compassion with this because sometimes it's really tragic, right? But generally speaking, these souls will that's just one of many exit points that they could have chosen, right? Dependent upon the experience that they came here to have and
Yeah.
exit with, right?
Yeah.
I feel like my experience with my dad is such like an interesting case study for like all of the things that we've talked about, because it was everything that we've talked about today happened with him over the span of 5-ish years. I started having intuitions, excuse me, about his passing years and years and years before it happened. And I would get all of these pieces of information, but nothing ever came to fruition. It never played out in that way. I wasn't given really many opportunities to like intervene. And my dad had health challenges. He had mental health challenges. So there was a lot um, going on with him. And I remember, you know, that when he actually did pass, I had like nobody, I'm, you know, have a lot of medium friends in my circle. None of us knew that was going to happen. And yet when I looked back, when Ginette looked back, when people looked back at the 5 years of information, we had every piece of information. December, heart, peaceful, surrounded by love, which was his dog. Like we had all of the pieces. He died December 1st at like 2 in the morning, right? With his dog by his side from an undiagnosed heart condition that we didn't know he had, really peacefully. And yet, the point in his life that he was at, he had actually really taken like a positive upswing in that he was trying to be healthier, trying to kind of move his life in a different trajectory. And it was his, at that point his soul was like, no, though, it's actually like your time. Like this is how this has to go. But years prior to that, he had had a brain injury accident and he had seizures and all this stuff, and he was in the hospital for months, and he was in this like half comatose state, and he was arguing. Like you could see him laying there, and he was like thrashing in his bed and like arguing with somebody. And I remember Ginette at the time, I was like, what is happening? Because when you're really close to it, it's really hard sometimes to
Yeah.
get into that energy, right? Which is another thing that people think like, well, don't you just know? And it's like, no, when you're close to it, sometimes they don't want you in that information. And sometimes you're just never going to be able to, no matter how hard you want to be involved in that information.
Mhm.
And she said like his spirit is fighting. He wants to leave, but source, his higher self is like, no, you're staying put. And at that point in his life, he was not well. He was
Mhm.
really having a hard time. And I could tell he was fighting. He didn't want to be there. Even when he like woke up out of his kind of coma state, he was angry and grumpy and like saying that he wasn't going to get better and he didn't want to. And there was this like push pull for months. He randomly, months after being in the hospital, stabilized, has like a massive seizure out of nowhere, just happens to be in the right place at the right time. It would have taken his life for sure, but because of where he was in that exact moment, they were able to get him, intubated, make sure he was getting oxygen to his brain. And he woke up from that seizure. And they were saying to us, like, we don't know what the state of his consciousness is going to be when he wakes up, just based on how hard and how long he seized for. And when he woke up, he was like a different person. It was like he went to the other side during those seizures and they were like, it is not your time. Stop it. And he like woke up nicer and happier. And he wasn't in this like tortured state. And he healed and we healed parts of our relationship. And there was like this really beautiful period after that where he was in this completely different energy. And then unfortunately, his choices, he then kind of went down this road of ill health again. But it's just so interesting, like looking at his whole experience of he wanted to go, but it wasn't his time. So they were like, nope, you got to stay put. It's not quite your time yet. And then when he kind of changed his trajectory a little bit, they were like, no, actually, now is your time. Like, you've mended what you needed to mend, you've done what you've needed to do. Now you can go. And here's all of the ways that we, gave them information around your passing. But we're going to protect them from having that burden of, should I have done something? Should I have
Mhm.
called him that night? It's that whole, and so that's why when I talk about grief, it's like it's so hard and it's also so beautiful because it's like it's all the love of spirit, the love of that we have for our loved ones, our own selves. It's all just so intertwined with death, but that just gets lost. And that's sad and it's hard. I think it makes grief harder than it needs to be.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that, Elyse.
Yeah, that's beautiful share. Beautiful share.
Cullen is such a like beautiful journey of a tortured heart experience, but also so much. And he's also a great example too of the last part of his life was really hard. And so in spirit, he shows up as his like vibrant, happy younger self. He doesn't
No.
show himself to me as, dad that wasn't well in the end. It's dad that was the ski racer, that was charismatic, that had a TV show and a radio show and was living his best life. And what you were saying, Lisa, that speaks to like the freedom of how they can connect with the best parts of themselves and the best parts of their experience after they go. And
Totally.
there's such a beautiful lightness and freedom in that when we're kind of released from maybe some of the things that we had to carry as a human.
Hmm. Hmm. And sometimes the crossing can happen so quickly that you're like, what? Like, how did I have zero idea? And a close friend of mine passed a year and a half ago, and she has come through on the other side. It took a while for me to actually be able to like communicate with her because I was so close. Um, but she said, because like what she came here to do in her human life was a tough road. Like she had some major soul growth, but she experienced some serious hardship in her world. And it's so coming back to when we said like we got kind of the download where there's going to be a bunch of souls leaving, that can be for different reasons. And she explained to me that um she had a soul agreement with her guides, and like her higher self made a soul agreement that she was going to be extracted from her human self to be able to help the humans on this side raise in consciousness. She said, I did what I had to do with my boys. They're grown, and she wasn't married. She didn't have any grandbabies. Her sons were adults. They were doing their thing, and she was like, she was so connected to spirit and the angels. Like she was an angel soul, and so she did her human growth, and she's like, I got more that I can do on the other side. And she did. And although it's so hard for us humans, I'm like look at you go.
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? Like, and she shows up. My daughter is 5 and she just talks about her all the time coming to see her, and she leaves us feathers all the time. Feathers are her thing, right? And so sometimes you get these different things that can bring you peace too, where it's their soul says, I did what I had to do in this human realm, but the world is going this direction and it's moving in this frequency, and my soul came to experience with this, and now it's my time to go,
Yeah.
for whatever the reasons are, and there are big reasons, right?
Mhm.
And so that one came specifically because she's like, I'm working as a guide on the other side now to help light workers raise the collective consciousness. It's a big undertaking. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I can see. She's like, I can do this on this side way better than on human side.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know, that brought me a ton of peace too, or whatever it might be, my time here with the collective consciousness. We talk about this consciousness shift. Well, if their soul came to grow within a certain consciousness and their contract is over with that, then they can go on the other side, be in that light consciousness, because their human self is done with that level. You know what I mean?
I've talked to a lot of souls in the last 6 months that have that have said that
Hmm.
they crossed and they knew that they could do better now on the other side. They're still so involved in humanity growing and ascending. And I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of souls crossing in general right now, is those that have completed their life. And even if I compare this to my NDE, when we went over my blueprint up to that point, they're like, you've done what you had to do. You can stay. It had completed. But I desired to come back. But I can see why souls would stay but
Hmm.
continue on their helping humanity.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's I've been at that point where the story you're telling, I feel, is probably quite similar, where she's like, no, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna cross over. I'm better off here now to help. And so I think that just helps to color our understanding of how it works, how we do go on, how those that have left are still very vested in our growth as a collective, but as the individuals that we're connected to, right?
Hmm.
Like we still want to see them grow and learn and support them, and they're there. And so I think it's something we really do need to remember, that when people die, they're not far away. They're in a different dimensional space, which they have the ability to hear us all the time, anytime.
The freedom,
The
right?
freedom.
The
Yeah.
freedom. That was the word that came through for me yesterday. It was like, he's free, like expansive freedom, right? Free of the limitations of his human body. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I
And
think, oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. No, no, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say that's one of the things, like when you hear stories like in your death experiences, that is like one of the most common things that you hear, is the amount of love and freedom and like expansiveness, that it's like there's almost not a word, an
Yeah,
English word for it. It's
yeah,
just so
Mhm.
much more than we could ever imagine. And you watch shows like Surviving Death on Netflix, and like they all say the same thing.
Mhm.
Maybe different language or different words, but it all encompasses that same deep expansiveness, that it's like we just can't, or I don't think our brains are are evolved enough or open enough to actually like be able to hold what it
exactly,
actually means.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You said something, Lisa, that reminded me of taking it took a while for you to connect with your friend after she passed. And I remember after my dad passed, and I've heard this from clients, and so just to kind of share it, if you have had this. Oh, it's 11:11. Hi, Dad. That's his number. He was the one that introduced me to like 11:11, make a wish, when I was little.
Oh my gosh, I got
Yeah.
goosebumps all over my
Yeah.
body.
And this clock is wrong too. It's not 11:11.
That's
They're like,
amazing.
what dimension are you in? It's the on 40 on the hour, not 11. But this clock is not right. Anyways, um, when my dad passed, I remember leading up to the funeral, I felt him, like he was there. I could feel. I remember I was crying one day, and his hand was on my back, and I could hear him, like he was just there. And then I remember after the day after the funeral, it was like radio silence, and I was mad. I was like, what the hell? Like, this is when I need you. Everything quiets down, people move on with their lives, but we're still in our deep grief process. Like, where are you? What the heck? And I remember Spirit saying that um, you need that separation. We do step away from you because if we were always to be able to just feel them like that, we would be able to numb out or bypass the grief process. And there's
Mhm.
so much healing and growth for our own individual journeys through grief and through processing grief and being able to hold that experience as hard as it is, that allows us to grow. So they're almost doing us a disservice by bypassing the grief process and being too close.
Yeah.
We need to move through that to mend and heal from that, because again, and if somebody's in your life, right, you have some sort of soul contract with them, so there's lessons within that relationship, positive or, you know, challenging growth lessons, whatever it is. If they're too with us right out of the gate, we don't ever feel that sense of like, oh, I need to grieve this and heal it. It becomes easy to bypass, and as humans we're really good at that. So
Yeah.
just as kind of like a side note, that if you feel like your loved one is there and then all of a sudden they're gone. I know for me, I was questioning, like, did I just make all that up? Like, am I just, you know, you question yourself. And even as like a practicing intuitive person, I still had questions in that moment. And I just appreciated understanding why they're creating that space, because we talk so much about like science and spirit, human, like we're still having a human experience and we need to hold both. And that's hard in those grief moments,
Yeah.
but they, even on the other side, they're still doing what they can to support our growth and our learning and our lessons, and
Yeah.
sometimes that means giving us a little space.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say this from experience doing readings, is that even if they don't show up and aren't there all the time, they always want the person to know that they're always there,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're always good.
Yep.
There's no pain on that side, you know? They don't hold that same human emotion. So,
Absolutely.
and I just want to say to anybody out there who's listening who have experienced grief of a lost loved one, that we send you so much love and compassion, and that it's not easy. And like Elise said, like, we're not saying to spiritually bypass any of the grieving process in this, that you feel all your feels and you hold space to be able to have all your human emotions and go over your connectiveness to that person, because they'll feel it. They'll feel all of it. And, but just to know that I can say, like, with my whole heart, that they're not gone forever, right? But like, do your grieving. And if anybody has any questions or wants to talk it out or anything, like, contact us, you know,
Yeah.
we'll be there for you. So,
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. I think this is such a great conversation, and it is very timely, I think, for all of us. And so I would imagine that would mean it's very timely for many people watching. So thank you guys. And so for all of you guys, if you haven't yet connected with us on the Avalon Spirit Facebook group, please do. We're on there regularly. And also subscribe and share here. And if you guys are looking to connect with any of us, check out avalonspirit.com. You can find all of us there under personal journey guides. And we will be back again next week. All right. Have a good weekend, guys.